Hi everyone, this is Anatole, and I just wanted to make a vlog about the reported news of the cancellation of Vertigo comic line. And for me, it is an occasion of sadness because Vertigo comics were the comics that I ate and lived and breathed back in the late 80s and early 90s. And while their importance has faded, even today I am still reading some of the output from Vertigo Comics. So right now I've been reading the series American Carnage, and recently I enjoyed other series such as Clean Room and Sheriff of Babylon. But regardless of all that, I wanted to spend a few moments to talk about the brief history of Vertigo, what they meant to comic books, and why they should be important to you and I. So join me after the break and we'll discuss this a little more. Welcome back, and now let's talk a little bit about the history of Vertigo Comics. And the first major player is Jeanette Kahn, who was the executive in charge of DC Comics in the early 1980s. And one of her initiatives was to entice more creators from Marvel Comics. And one way to do that was to offer more incentives to the creators, and so higher royalties, and then beginning with Vertigo Comics, creative rights to the creators, something that had not existed in comic books, in mainstream comic books. And the second part of this creation of Vertigo Comics, after the initiative of Jeanette Kahn to hire more creative people, younger creators into the industry, and to give them rights to their creations. The second part was to find new talent. And there was an untapped source of comic book fans that had not been used in American comics, really, and that was the British creators. So the second key person in the creation of Vertigo Comics was Karen Berger, and she was tasked with going to England and finding writers and artists to begin working on DC Comics. And she found a group of people who were fans of DC Comics and were just chomping at the bit to get their hands on these characters. And Karen Berger's natural instinct was to do things weird, and she found a group of creators whose natural instincts suited her own, and whose influences were not the same as the American creators. They were drawing upon British New Wave science fiction, European literature, philosophy, and golden age of superheroes. So it was a very different approach to the material that led to the creation of a different kind of comic book. So you can look for the creation of Sandman and Hellblazer and Swamp Thing as things that came from this initiative under the direction of Karen Berger. And it's remarkable because we have at the head of all this creativity, the head of a major publishing company, two women executives, two women in charge. And if you look back at the history of publishing, the history of very influential editors, it's very hard to find women that were part of that process. So that's another thing that makes this very different from other such stories about successful publishing arms. And then what led to the demise of Vertigo Comics? At the turn of this decade, around 2011, there was a rebranding, a reboot of the comics line, the DC Comics line, called the 52, the New 52. And part of that was to bring some of the superhero properties that were part of Vertigo, such as Swamp Thing, Animal Man, and Hellblazer, into the mainstream comic book arm. And up until then, Vertigo Comics was publishing mainly genre fiction. There was a small output that we could classify as comic book literature, but any of the genres just done in a very weird and auteur-driven way. That's what Vertigo is known for. So crime, horror, science fiction. I'm sure I'm missing some fantasy, such as Sandman. And so then Karen Berger left DC about a year and a half after that, and I have not read a good explanation why, but I'm sure there was creative differences behind the scenes as to what the direction of Vertigo was going to be. And then the second part of what maybe led to the demise of Vertigo. So losing Karen Berger, that was a brain drain, which I think the publishing arm never recovered from. The second thing was the cherry of creative rights that lured such talented people at the beginning. Started the bloom faded from the rose because other companies began offering creative rights, such as Image, and also giving higher page rates. So there became less incentive to go with Vertigo, and that became part of a vicious cycle. So it started to attract less talented creators, or if it did attract higher creators, it was ideas that were rejected by Image or IDW, just other companies. And so the quality began to suffer. And so then people had less of incentive to go to Vertigo Comics because they would not find the high quality product they found in the past. They would go elsewhere. So that led to the sales total for Vertigo Comics decreasing, which then made it more difficult for them to attract creators, and so on and so on. And in the last 4 years, I want to say, there was not a single comic from Vertigo that got past issue number 20. How can you hire a creator for a long run on a comic book? The kind of thing, a long run, is what you can use to get a secondary stream of revenue from it, because you can sell those in graphic novel format, and you're not just selling 1 or 2 collections, you're selling 5 or 6. And then a long run is which you can use to entice streaming platforms to turn that property into a series, which will then lead people back to the comic books. So all that began to dwindle, the influence and the sales of Vertigo. And it just seemed like the people in charge of DC never had the motivation to shepherd this imprint like they had in the past without Karen Berger. The will was not there. And so it just died at the death of 1,000 cuts. And we are here today where DC is putting its emphasis on their black label, and Vertigo Comics is no more. So for me, that is a moment of great sadness, because like I said before, when I was in my 20s, late teens, early 20s, I think the majority of what I read was Vertigo. A little bit of other things, but the things that interested me most, the things that were really smart, let me say really smart, but their impulse, their motivation in making comics came from obscure places and drew from obscure references, and those were the kind of things that resonated with me. And they were done in a way that was for mature audiences, so the content could be about subjects you wouldn't see in just a mainstream superhero comic book that also had to draw children as part of the audience. So there were a number of reasons why Vertigo struck a chord with me and continued to strike a chord with me. And I'm sad that that label is gone. So hopefully that my little talk, if you've never checked out anything from Vertigo, this will lead you to it. Sandman, of course, is the obvious pick to go to. But if you go anywhere online, just look for top 10 Vertigo titles. You'll find a list there, and I'm sure you'll find something on that list that will appeal to you. I could just read off a list, but that's just a waste of my time and yours. You can find them online. It's been done many times before. So that's it. Vertigo is dead. Long live Vertigo. And that's all I have for now. So take care and be well. Goodbye.